All right, welcome back, everybody. This is episode 2 of Newscast. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. We go over weekly news updates of the biggest stories of the week. And if you haven't checked out last week's video, episode 1, go ahead and check that out before we get started here. So, like always, got the trusty Corona on hand. And it is a beautiful, beautiful afternoon. I hope everybody had a good week, accomplished things that they set out to accomplish. And without further ado, let's get into it. So this week I focused heavy on foreign policy articles because there's a lot of things happening in the world that are of grave importance to the United States and Western allies. And I feel like you guys should just be aware of that. So starting with the top 4 or 5 news articles of the week. I didn't really count them because I kind of grouped a few into the same story. We'll start with China as number 1. We'll move into Russia for number 2. Number 3, we'll move into Iran, Russia, and China as a combined conversation. Number 4 will be Ireland, with briefly talking about Australia in the process of that. And that should tie up this week. So if you guys want to jump around, there should be chapters in the bottom of the screen. So check that out. And like always, if this brings you guys value, go ahead and click the like and subscribe buttons. That would be greatly appreciated. All right, so let's jump into our first topic of the afternoon. That is China. So this is the Business Insider article. It is titled, U.S. Destroyer Challenges Chinese South China Sea Claims as U.S. Navy Warns Nothing Beijing Says Will Deter It. This is written by Julie Coleman on January 20th, 2022. So, on Thursday, January 20th, the U.S. Navy challenged China's unlawful and excessive maritime claims with a Freedom of Navigation Operation, acronymed FONOP, which took place near the Parcel Islands, which is considered contested territory in the South China Sea, as China, the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Vietnam claim sovereignty over the disputed area. The operation challenged restrictions on innocent passage and excessive territorial claims by China. As you may know, China has expanded its sphere of influence into the southern side of the South China Sea. So, in response, China accused the U.S. Navy of violating its sovereignty and security, whereas the U.S. Navy stated that they were simply, quote, defending every nation's right to fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows, end quote. The U.S. Navy released an official statement that, quote, unlawful and sweeping maritime claims in the South China Sea pose a serious threat to freedom of the seas, including the freedoms of navigation, overflight, free trade, unimpeded commerce, and the freedom of economic opportunity for South China Sea littoral nations, end quote. So if you may recall, China has set out to tighten its grip on the South China Sea by actually slowly and decisively positioning military and non-military assets around the Spratly and Parcel Islands. But if you look at it from a Chinese perspective, they pose a serious military advantage as they allow early warning systems to, potential hostilities towards China's mainland. And they actually allow China to reach a much broader geographical location, which we'll get into that here in a second. I got a pretty cool website that I found that shows you just how much these islands mean for China strategically. So China began building artificial islands. Yes, like artificial islands, right? In 2013, by positioning sand from the sea floor on top of rocks or reefs that were close to the water surface. So according to Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, now this is the website that I was talking to you guys about. I will show you guys that here in a second. According to Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, to date, China has built 20 outposts in the Parcel Islands and 7 in the Spratlys. This has resulted in China creating an additional 3,200 acres of new land. Yes, once again, new land. So this has allowed them to greatly expand their presence past their mainland shores. The U.S. essentially allowed them to do this if they agreed not to militarize these new islands. And of course, China played ball for a short time period. And then they basically turned around and put airplane runways and other military assets on these islands. So this was the second FONOP of the year against Chinese claims in the South China Sea. The first one occurred near the Spratly Islands on Tuesday. So within the same week, the U.S. Navy challenged China's claims to these islands. So according to the U.S. Navy statement, U.S. forces operate in the South China Sea on a daily basis as they have for more than a century. So it's business as usual for the US Navy. So if you go to this website, check it out. It's pretty unique, basically keeping track of all these new islands that are being created by China. And as you see, there's long airstrips down here. There's other buildings that we aren't so familiar with. Now, if you click on any various item, it'll actually take you to a larger outlook. So occupied by China, where it's located, what each different nation kind of claims its name is. And then the development. Pop over and check that out. Now, if you go over to more resources, you can actually come over here. You can do analysis, and there's a bunch of websites and news articles. Well, not websites. There's a bunch of news articles that basically gives an analysis of various situations. So if you're curious and want to know more about that, check that out as well. But what I wanted to show you guys specifically was the island tracker. So if you go to China, if you go to maps, okay, so what I wanted to show you specifically, AMTI's interactive maps strive to provide the most complete, accurate, and up-to-date sources of geospatial information on maritime in Asia. Click a map below to explore information on Asia's maritime claims, disputed reefs, and islets, and more. So China's Maritime Power Projection Network. So this is last updated September 15th, 2021 by Air, Land, and Sea, China's Maritime Power Projection Network. So they basically combine all these different various bits of information and turn it into visible representations of what this could mean for China, what China's sphere of influence and power or projected power can look like. So I'm not going to go in depth. I'm not going to stop for this whole thing. Feel free to pause the video and take a look at it, read these captions. Basically, I'm just going to do a little recap. So these are the Spratly Islands up here. This is the Parsley Islands down here. China has developed substantial military assets to these islands, including HQ-9 anti-air and YJ-12B anti-ship missiles. This is one of the islands. It looks like it's for mainly its Navy. They have a little port entrance right here, and I'm sure there's like docks all around this place here. The operational range of Chinese fighter aircraft such as the J-15 from these islands is in theory quite far. So I will go over to Google Earth and show you guys what this area is. All right, so here we got it. It's Taiwan, Vietnam, Cambodia, right? The Philippines are all right through here. The Spratly Islands are down here. The Parcel Islands are right here. And this is the South China Sea. Now, if we zoom out a little bit, you can see North Korea, South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Singapore. But if we go back to this right over here, Vietnam is obviously affected. So this is China's mainland right here. This is their main beach. I called it beachfront property. But this is their mainland right over here. So they are trying to project power and influence further than that. So in reality, the combat aircraft can only effectively operate within the range of available radar and sensing platforms. Without external radar coverage, they have a limited awareness of their surroundings. So that makes sense. Wow, if you can't see it, can't sense it, then you can't really operate based on unknown information, right? These aircrafts will be pretty vulnerable if they were to do that. So that kind of shrinks their operational capacity. You scroll down, airborne early warning control, like I talked about earlier, that greatly increases their ability here. They have limitations as well. So if you guys want more information on this, I'll leave it in the link. But all in all, they will combine all this information here. Carrier limitations. So their new carriers basically allow them to operate all within this geographical location. All right, so this comes shortly after the Chinese military has been building up their Navy fleets to compete with the United States globally. At the moment, they do have the largest Navy in the world in terms of just the amount of ships that they have. The United States Navy is still the most powerful, the most capable Navy in the planet. But as you see, the tides are shifting. China will probably continue to build up its Navy capacity, and they will probably assert more assets in the Spratly Islands and the Parcel Islands and continue to harass people who try to go through there. So I'm glad that the United States is finally starting to show some strength in the South China Sea. For too long, we were allowing China to kind of have their way in the South China Sea, and it hindered our relationship with obviously Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam. It hindered our relationship with all these places because China was obviously expanding their power and their influence in the area. And then it made our allies kind of question the United States' commitment to their shared security. And rightfully so, because those nations are the closest to China, and so they will be the first to have to engage China in any kind of armed conflict. Or if they avoid it, China will basically they would take over their country. I'm not saying that's what the Chinese Communist Party would do, but the Communist Party currently wants to reunite Taiwan in their civil conflict as Chinese, and the Taiwanese, they don't want to do that. So it's nice to see the United States Navy going in there and basically saying, yeah, we're here, we're cruising around, we're following international law. Go ahead and make a move. What are you guys gonna do about it? And it's interesting because not only did the U.S. challenge China's claims to those islands, but in the same time, they challenged Taiwan and Vietnam's claim to the same islands. They kind of let them know that, hey, like, you guys claim this to be sovereign territory for you guys as well. Well, we're the United States, and we say, we go where we want to go. And not only did it show China, but it also kind of reminded our allies that the U.S. Navy can be here, we are here, and we're not going anywhere. We've been here for over a century in the same area, so deal with it. That's something to watch for. This has been developing for the past few years now, since 2013. It'll continue in the future. At the moment, the U.S. Air Force still continues to fly over that contested land. As you see, the U.S. Navy continues to drive ships through there, to sail ships through there. They're basically letting China make the first move, because China isn't stupid. They're not going to declare war on the United States for sailing through international waters. And I hope they wouldn't be that stupid, because it would be a messy conflict. That brings us to our second topic of the day, which is Russia. Russia has been amassing troops on the Ukrainian border. 2014, they annexed Crimea and have been holding Crimea as one of their own territories, which it's unlikely that the United States or any of the Western allies will be able to persuade Russia to give back Crimea to the Ukraine. So the next big question is will Russia invade Ukraine, or will they not? So Russia in particular, this news article is that the U.S. sends aircraft carrier group to Mediterranean as Russia threat looms. This was written January 21st, 2022. The U.S. military has sent out USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier strike group to take part in NATO naval training exercises in the Mediterranean amid tensions between the West and Russia. Neptune Strike 22 is slotted to begin January 29th and run through February 4th. So according to the DoD press secretary, John Kirby, the exercise will, quote, demonstrate NATO's ability to integrate the high-end maritime strike capabilities of an aircraft carrier strike group to support the deterrence and defense of the alliance. Now, everybody's asking if this is in relation to what is happening on the Ukrainian border, to which the U.S. Navy has said that this event, Neptune Strike 22, has been planned for over a year now. Now, whether or not the details have changed to make it more optimized to the current situation is unknown. John Kirby has said that if that was the case, then he hasn't been informed about it. He has limited knowledge if that were to be the case. So the war games have been planned for over a year, as John Kirby stated. This is happening as NATO forces and weapons are moving closer to Ukraine. For example, Spain has in the past week sent warships to the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Spain is also thinking of sending fighter jets to Bulgaria. Denmark is sending a frigate to the Baltic Sea, and France has since offered to send troops to Romania. So now, if we go back to Google Earth and we see what's happening over here. So Spain is sending battleships to the Mediterranean and the Baltic Sea. Did I say the Baltic Sea? France is volunteering to send troops to Romania, which is obviously in close relation to Ukraine. The United States has troops positioned in Poland, and here is the Black Sea right off the coast of Crimea. And so yeah, weapons and troops are amassing on both sides for the Russians and the Western allies. So basically, the U.S. is allowing 3 NATO allies, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to send American-made weapons from their inventories to be used by Ukraine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with the Russian Foreign Ministry on Friday, stating that he wants to use diplomacy to de-escalate the situation, but if it proves impossible and Russia decides to pursue aggression against the Ukraine, they will be met with a, quote, a united, swift, and severe response. So according to Reuters, NATO rejects Russia's demand to withdraw forces from Romania and Bulgaria. So that goes into NATO rejected Russia's demand to withdraw its forces from Romania and Bulgaria. Moscow basically wants guarantees that NATO will stop its expansion into Eastern Europe and return to its 1997 borders. But since 1997, NATO has expanded by 14 additional countries, including Hungary in 1999, Poland in 1999, Bulgaria in 2004, Estonia in 2004, Latvia and Lithuania in 2004, Romania in 2004, Slovakia in 2004, Albania in 2009, Croatia in 2009, Montenegro 2017, and most recently North Macedonia in 2020. So what does that look like on the map to go to pre-1997 levels? So Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, Slovenia, basically all these Eastern European countries that Russia feels are cozying up into the NATO alliance. He doesn't want to see that, right? So that's why he annexed Crimea in 2019. That's why Georgia and Russia went to war in 2008 to get them not to basically join NATO, and the Ukraine. But the West and NATO is determined to allow those countries who wish to join NATO to join NATO. So the Ukraine and Georgia have both most recently wanted to join NATO, and Russia is feeling that it has nowhere to retreat to, and that NATO alliance is getting too close to Russia's borders. And so now we have the standstill of the Ukraine. Obviously, the Russian Foreign Ministry said that Russia wanted all foreign troops, weapons, and other military hardware withdrawn from the countries of Romania and Bulgaria, into which NATO replied that these demands would create a first and second class of NATO members. And obviously, NATO, the alliance, is not going to accept first and second class countries. A NATO spokesperson said that NATO is vigilant and continues to assess the need to reinforce the eastern part of the alliance. So obviously it's a strategic interest that NATO would want to strengthen their Eastern European alliance to deter Russia, Iran, obviously China, the 3 biggest adversaries. An attack on one is an attack on all. So the more, the merrier. It kind of, keeps our adversaries at bay. And usually once you have a military alliance, the economic alliance kind of follows suit. And so obviously it's hitting Russia on 2 different fronts. You got the economic alliance to the west and then the military alliance on the west. And now it's kind of alienating Russia. So it'll be interesting to see if the United States, Western allies, what they do, because obviously decreasing the 14 additional countries that have been included into NATO is not an option, and Russia isn't accepting anything less. And so now you have this standoff. Yeah, but don't worry, it gets better. No, it actually gets worse with our number 3 news article. All right, so the third article on here is Iran, Russia, and China hold joint Navy drill in Indian Ocean. On January 21st, Iran, Russia, and China began an ongoing naval drill in the Indian Ocean aimed at boosting security at sea, according to Iranian state media. There were 11 Iranian ships, 3 Russian ships, including a destroyer, and 2 Chinese vessels. Iran's Revolutionary Guard, who is tasked with protecting the Iranian Islamic law, also participated with smaller ships and helicopters. The maneuvers are set to cover roughly 6,500 square miles in the northern part of the Indian Ocean and will incorporate night fighting, rescue operations, and firefighting drills. So this is the 3rd naval drill that the 3 countries have participated in since 2019. The joint drill started following the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, Ibrahim's trip to Russia to meet with Vladimir Putin. Upon his return, Iranian president said, quote, improving bilateral relations between Tehran and Moscow will enhance security for the region and the international arena, end quote. So this is the textbook The enemy of my enemy is my friend, because Iran, Russia, and China are all our strategic adversaries. Yeah, adversaries would be the proper term. Each has their own unique situation and their issues with the United States. Each has a historical squabble, would you say? Yeah, and a historical squabble with the United States. And in this case, the three are teaming up against the West, you could say. So also on Thursday, January 20th, Russia announced sweeping naval maneuvers in multiple areas with over 140 warships and more than 60 aircrafts, which is planned to last through next month. These maneuvers will take place in the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, the Northeast Atlantic, and the Pacific Ocean. And of course, the joint exercise with Iran in the Indian Ocean. So all these nations are moving their navy to all different parts of the world, claiming it's just an exercise. But I think everybody in reality, if you're looking at it, is recognizing the posturing that's going on. So obviously, each nation probably doesn't want to see conflict, armed conflict, but they must prepare and position like they are willing and able to accept it and obviously defeat the adversary. So this is obviously the downside of human interaction. You know, war is destruction, and it will be destruction, and our navies will have to fight first before anything else follows up. The value of a strong navy goes without saying, right? If you own the oceans, you own the world. But as the old school Hunger Games would say, let the war games begin. No, I don't want to see any war games, but it seems like we're headed that direction. The DoD ordered that the U.S. Embassy personnel's families evacuate the country of the Ukraine. And with history as a pretext, once you start ordering personnel to evacuate a country, usually worse things are coming down the pike. So a lot has changed in 1 week. I anticipate that we'll see a lot of change within this next coming week. And so we'll keep an eye on the situation. So our fourth and final story relates back to the dreaded COVID in Ireland, right? How do you say this? Let's hear how Google says it. Reuters. Okay. So this news article is from Reuters, and it says Ireland drops most COVID restrictions in the wake of the Omicron storm. So Ireland Prime Minister Michael Martin said that in national address. Michael Martin. All right, sorry, I had to do that, reference to The Patriot. Shout out The Patriot, Mel Gibson. Great movie. Ireland Prime Minister Michael Martin said in a national address that they are planning to scrap almost all of its COVID-19 restrictions on Saturday after overcoming the Omicron storms that led to surges in infections. So this comes following a week where Ireland had the second highest incident rate of COVID-19, but also one of the highest uptakes of booster vaccines. Some of the restrictions being lifted are bars and restaurants will no longer be required to close at 8 p.m. Limitations on household gatherings will come to an end. Indoor and outdoor venues are scheduled to return to full capacity just in time for next month's Six Nations Rugby Championship. So people will still be required to wear masks on public transport and in shops until the end of February. And the Prime Minister praised Ireland's citizens for adapting and doing what their governments asked of them, saying that they did exactly what the government asked of them, which is obviously a double-edged sword on that. Let's be real. But good on Ireland. I hope that the rest of the world follows suit, because we're starting to see that the vaccines aren't as effective as they were promised to be, that boosters are going to be required every couple of months. But I take the position that you can't vaccinate the whole world every 6 months, or at this rate, every 3 months. It's just not realistic. So Ireland, good on them. I hope their numbers stay low, and I hope that their citizens enjoy the additional freedoms that they are getting back. It's pretty rare that governments return freedoms that they take away during emergency acts. We're struggling here in the United States to regain what has been taken from us in the past couple of years. Not so much in red states, but for sure in California, New York, all those kind of places. And on the flip hand side, we will look at Australia, and Australia has a very different perspective going on this past week. This past week was two of Australia's most deadly days for COVID. On Tuesday, the 18th of January, 76 people reportedly died at the hospitals of COVID-19. And then again on Friday, the 21st of January, 80 people passed away to COVID over there. So since the pandemic began in 2020, they have only had, I think, 3,000 people lose their lives, which, 3,000 people, that's a lot of people. But in comparison to other Western developed worlds, that number is quite low. So I don't like the way Australia is locking down their citizens, but I do appreciate that only 3,000 people over there have died. Mark McGowan, the premier of Western Australian state, had to back down on his promise to reopen that state to the rest of the country by February 5th. They have an election coming up in May, and both candidates, due to the state being closed to the rest of the country, cannot campaign in that state currently. Ireland, good job. Australia, keep at it. Better times are ahead. And for our recap on the world, I hope that we can avoid war with Russia, because NATO, an attack on one, an attack on all, is going to be a lot of firepower on the ground in Europe. And I know the Europeans have seen a ton of war in their long history. It seems like they're just positioned in the world where all the shit that happens right there in Europe. And it sucks to have, Russia excluded from the Western world and positioning themselves as anti-Western. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. The world, the distribution of power in the planet is as is. So all we can do as citizens and concerned citizens is report what's happening, and hopefully our diplomats will be able to find a peaceful resolution and de-escalate the issues that we are currently seeing. But yeah, this week's news cap was basically heavy on foreign policy and international relations. I feel like these were the biggest stories of the week, and I feel like these are what people should be aware of what's going on around the world. I didn't include really any domestic issues because I am a firm believer that domestic issues will be worked out with the state, and that the federal government should try to keep their hands out of domestic issues. Too often for a while, the United States has allowed presidents to dictate a lot of the internal happenings of American society, and I am just a stark opposition of that. I believe that the federal government's responsibility, first and foremost, national security. They should concern themselves with global issues like we see today. All right, guys, it's about that time again. Thanks for tuning in. I will catch you guys next week. Everybody stay safe. Accomplish big things this next week. Cheers. Stay safe.